Welcome back, everyone. Up now, we have our lovely Heather Chandler. She's going to be doing her talk on production first aid, getting projects back on track. Heather, I'm going to hand the stage over to you. Good luck.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. Yep, today I'm going to be talking about production first aid. I have my notes down here, so if you see me glancing down here, that's what I'm looking at. This session is about stabilizing troubled projects. This is not about restarting them, but about assessing the problem, being very structured about how you apply first aid. And these things can be applied by any teams, from large teams to small teams, to help stabilize their projects. It is completely normal for things to happen on your project that are outside of the plan. But if you catch them early and take action on them, it is going to help the project succeed in the long run. We're going to talk about the warning signs, some practical triage steps, communication strategies, and how you can detect early warning signs. All right. Next, who am I? Why should you listen to me? Well, my name is Heather Chandler, and I am the head of production at the Powell Group. And I have worked my whole life in production, it seems like. I've worked on massive franchises like Fortnite, Helldivers 2, and Ghost Recon. And I've worked with small indie teams that made games like Never Alone, Robots Need Love 2. And surprisingly, the problems that I see the teams struggle with on large or small teams or AAA or indie team can present themselves in very similar fashions. Although sometimes the solutions have to be scaled differently depending on what the actual problem is. And so even when you have a small indie team, you can have misalignment in expectations. And of course, this all will grow as you get with larger teams. And so when I have been working as a producer on these projects, my main focus has been to work with people, help diagnose issues, help get things stabilized and back up and running. Okay, so today we are going to talk about production first aid. So this is going to be, how do you recover from problems? How do you spot early warning signs? How can you apply a simple triage? And then after you've kind of diagnosed and solved the problem, how can you rebuild confidence if necessary and increase consistency of delivery, communication, or anything else on your project? Um, this is a very practical session, so I really want to get into like the nuts and bolts and the nitty gritty. And then I am hoping that you guys walk away with some very specific tools and techniques that you could use on your own projects. And then I will also be leaving time at the end for Q&A, and I would love for us to discuss some of your own production first aid challenges, and maybe we can talk about some different approaches or ways to solve them. Okay. Next. Why do games need first aid? As I said at the beginning, it's entirely normal for game projects to go off schedule, whether you're large or small. I think one of the problems, or one of the challenges that I see indie teams in particular struggle with, is that sometimes they will confuse working hard with working effectively. There is no doubt that indie game developers work very hard on their games, but I think sometimes when I go in and help them, I see them working in ways that are not as efficient or as effective, and it starts burning them out from their time and sort of their mental space. Most often this is because when they encounter a problem, they try to power through the problem and just keep moving forward, rather than stepping back and pausing and saying, okay, let's take a day or two and assess what this problem is and come up with some solutions. They often feel like they're on a train that is heading forward, that they can't stop or slow down. And because they work sometimes on very tight deadlines, or because it's a very small team and they're very resource constrained, that even stopping and context switching into problem solving mode makes you feel like you're losing this valuable time that you need to move the project forward. When As an example, on one project that I was on, the team kept pushing and pushing harder, and I came in and they were in the middle of a sprint, and they were just having issues with getting the build stable, getting key features in and working. And I said, okay, let's just pause for 3 days. Let's talk to everybody on the team. Let's work together on where we see the problems. We did a bunch of exercises where we tried to identify the bottlenecks, pinpoint what was happening, and then kind of over that 3 days, stepped through some different solutions. Then by the end of it, we were able to pull together a plan that worked within the time and resources we had, and we were able to get the project back on track. And even though they paused and took 3 days to do it, it actually helped them in the long run because they were working more effectively and were able to kind of stop that crunch mindset or stop that I have to keep moving forward mindset. It's okay to stop and pause, and take time to understand what your problems are. Okay. What a troubled project looks like. So as I'm reading this list, if you are experiencing some of these things, you may have a troubled project on your hands and you may not realize it yet. That is also a pretty common occurrence, is that sometimes people do not see that their projects are troubled because they're so close to it, and it takes somebody from the outside to come in and say, hey, why is this happening, or this seems strange, or what's going on here. But certain things are missed deadlines. Like, that's a pretty big one. If you're missing milestone deadlines, or you're missing internal deadlines that you've set, or even people are seeing their weekly goals, it's probably worth assessing if there's some sort of issue there. When you start missing deadlines, that's when scope starts changing, or you start getting what I call scope chaos, because either you have to start cutting features, or you've gotten stuck on something where a feature that you were supposed to be finished keeps getting bigger and bigger because you think of more things to add. And then once you kind of get into this chaos of scope and things don't seem to be well defined and the edges are kind of fuzzy, the team could experience a morale drop because now they feel like super panicked behind the 8 ball. And then when the team starts feeling bad, the communication gets worse and people are not communicating. They might just be heads down trying to fix the problem. And then when bad communication happens, you get to more missed deadlines. So you can see how all of these things, like missed deadlines, scope creep, low team morale, can feed on each other and kind of a cycle that can result in more problems and more missed deadlines. And so what you want to do is focus on how can you restore predictability, but you don't have to make things perfect. And I think that's another key takeaway, is when I do work with indie teams, many times I'm like, hey, let's do this. Let's try this solution. And they'll say, well, that's not going to fix the problem 100%. Well, is it going to fix it a little bit? Yeah, it'll actually make it a little bit better here. So you want to focus on things that you can do quickly and can get the project kind of back on track. But if you don't have the perfect solution at the perfect time, that's fine. The important thing is to put in solutions where you can and start getting that stabilization, so that if you have a solution, the perfect solution, which is going to take longer, you can be better prepared and set up to implement that perfect solution. If you have a troubled project, I would highly encourage you to go back and take a listen to a talk that was given earlier this morning by another one of my colleagues named Alina. Her talk was called "We Need to Talk: Working with Your Publisher When Things Go South." That is an excellent presentation that gives you some, again, very nuts and bolts, tangible things that you can work with if you do find yourself with a troubled project and you start troubleshooting it and you realize that this is going to impact or change sort of milestone goals, or it's something that the publisher might want to know about. her talk kind of walks you through what that process would look like, because I think above all, you want to work with a publisher that is on your side and is and most of the time publishers are going to be very open to hearing what's happening on the project, even if it's a troubled project, because they, like you, want to see the game get launched. So you definitely, when you have a troubled project, part of what you want to do is once you have your plan, you need to figure out, is this something we need to communicate out to the publisher, the vendors, and all these things, depending on what the solutions are. Okay. Early warning signs. So I just want to emphasize again, by the time you notice something, it could be too late, or it could be that the problem is so far gone that it's going to take 10 times as much effort to fix it, unless you had spotted it earlier. And I guess that's the problem, right? It is hard to kind of understand and see what is happening on the project, or what are some early warning signs. So these are some things that you can start looking at. If you're working on something and it's almost done and it's never quite done, that could be a warning sign. I had a team that was working very hard on their narrative structure, and they had designed the game to kind of be played out in various chapters, and their whole pipeline was built on sort of the early the narrative script and stuff like that. And so when we were working with them, we were trying to figure out, well, when is everything going to be done script wise so that we can hand it off to other teams? And every, week I would be checking in with them, and they'd be like, okay, we're almost done. We're almost done. But the work never got done, and the dates kept getting pushed out more and more and more. So one of the things that I did is I sat down with them and I said, look, instead of having our usual check-in meeting, let's just sit down and walk through this whole process of, creating the narrative and the documents that need to go with it and who needs to sign off on it, because they didn't really have a good pipeline or visibility into all the different steps that it took. And so in this instance, we were able to kind of map out their narrative pipeline, and then we were able to figure out why they could never get it finished. And then just seeing stuff like that in black and white, saying, hey, you said you need to do thing 2, thing 3, these things take this long, then so-and-so has to approve it. And so we were able to identify bottleneck points, process things, and documentation things. And so that was a pretty easy triage after we took the time to do it. Other things are silence. So if you don't hear from the team, it's not always necessarily good, especially if you're working remotely. If you are not hearing from your team members on their regular basis, something could be wrong. If the team is getting defensive, it could be a sign of burnout, or it could be a sign that they're super stressed out. They may not agree with the direction, but they don't want to say anything, right? Because they are scared of whatever repercussions they may have. So if the team is silent or defensive and is not communicating with you, this is a huge red flag that you need to start poking into to find out. Things that also could cause this are unclear goals or team misalignment. So if you're working on something and people don't quite understand what it is they're supposed to be doing, that can create a sense of stress and panic with the team. So when you're writing out your tasks, for example, you want to be very clear about, here's what the task is, here's what we're going to do, here's how we know that it's finished, and then make sure that the team is aligned around that plan. Oftentimes, I worked with the team in the past where everybody kind of had their own personal task list that they were working on. And so each individual was contributing to the forward progress of the game, but because they were not working in alignment on it, this person's kind of focusing on this area, this person's focusing on this system, this person's doing UI stuff, this person's tackling tech debt, but they weren't talking or interacting with each other. And so the game was kind of in this constant almost done situation, and it wasn't very stable because this was a remote team and they were not collectively planning at the beginning of the week and understanding what all of their tasks were. So if you don't have good goals or good team alignment, that's also a warning sign that the project's either already off track or is soon to be off track. Another warning sign is if there's confusion on roles and responsibilities. If you're working with a small team, people are going to wear many different hats. And so you want to make it clear who is responsible for doing what. Later on in the presentation, I'll talk about some tools that can help you clarify that. And then also, if whenever you talk to people, everything's always fine. I always kind of delve into that. If I'm like, ooh, everything's fine, tell me more. Like, what makes you think that? And so really try to understand, why do they think things are fine? And that could also help you understand if there is a problem with your game that you need to jump in and diagnose. All right, next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk just as, I call this production first aid, because it's nice for a presentation to kind of have, oh, this is the production first aid process. So these are all about triaging and whatnot. So we'll kind of talk through sort of, the 5-step framework. Each of these steps is really kind of what you need it to be. So you can use sort of more of a lightweight framework for this, or you can go super heavy with the process and documentation. It's really what works best for your team. And so we want to go in, we want to stop the bleeding. So that's where the word stop is very instrumental here. It is very hard for teams to conceptualize, like, hey, we should just stop and focus on the problem. But I can tell you from experience that even just stopping for a day and really assessing will pay you dividends later on down the line that are definitely worth the 1 or 2 days delay that you will have. Next, you want to diagnose the injury. So kind of figure out where things are. Is it a pipeline issue? Is the way you have your build pipeline set up terrible? Is the way that you're using Jira not bringing the information to the surface? Are people not working on the right things? So you really want to kind of diagnose what's happening and what the impact is. If it's a stability issue, if it's we're missing deadline issues, if it's the game is not fun, you've got to figure out what's the core thing you're trying to diagnose. And if you're on a project that has numerous injuries, you want to pick the one that is having the highest impact. And again, later on in this presentation, I'll talk about a couple techniques you can use to figure out what are the highest impact things to work on. Apply treatment. So, when you're working on a game project, there's many different ways you can treat an issue. The sort of 3 generic ways are: you can add more time, right? Give people more time to get their work done. You can add more money or people or resources to the project. So you could get specialists to come in, you could get a co-developer to come in, you could just fund additional time on there. I think the key thing to remember is that adding more people or more money to a project is not necessarily the first and best solution, because when you go that route, you have to account time for onboarding people, teaching them about your pipelines and all of that. And that in and of itself creates extra work for the team that's already under the gun. You could also rescope, right? That's another key thing you can do, is like, okay, this is too complicated to do. We're going to cut this feature. So those are sort of some of the general treatments that you could do. Once you kind of figure out what this is and what the treatment is, you want to communicate out to all interested parties. So for example, if you cut a key feature, like, okay, we're not going to have dedicated servers now, you need to let the publisher know, you need to let your testing house know, you need to communicate out these solutions so that everybody who's involved with the project knows and understands and is all aligned. And then after you communicate it out, you're waiting for this recovery, like we've recovered from this issue, and then now how can we prevent this from happening again? As an example, one of the problems we had, the build was breaking on a daily basis. So they would try to run overnight builds so that they would be ready in the morning, and the builds were never ready. They were always broken or had some sort of error. The people on the team didn't really have a clear process for how they were handling commits. And so people were just kind of going in and committing things at random times, and they weren't doing regular smoke checks or anything like that. And so for this solution, we went in and started doing daily smoke checks, smoke tests on the game. And then anybody who had issues, they were assigned those in Jira and had to fix their high priority build issues first. They were treated as blockers. And whenever you were getting ready to merge something into the build, you had to make sure that the build was green, i.e. everything was up and running, so that if you merged something and the build broke, it was a much easier way to pinpoint what broke the build and to fix it. And so once they started kind of doing this and having better build hygiene, they were able to reduce the build issues by quite a bit on the project and get better at having good builds every morning that QA could test with. All right. Okay, so what does it mean when we say stop the bleeding? You've already heard me say this before. You want to freeze your scope, you want to pause non-critical work, you just want to stop. This piece is important. Now you may say, well, we've got 20 people on the team. Are you saying stop all 20 people? Well, you may not need to stop all 20 people, but you need to identify which people are most likely to be impacted. If you have someone whose job is to make concept art and they have a stack of concept art that they're supposed to be working on, they probably can continue doing that. But if the concept art is the part that's having a problem, like either the concept art is not up to standards or it's taking too long to do, then yeah, you would want to stop their work. So you really want to pause as much work as you can and freeze everything you're doing and sit down with the team and set aside a few days to talk through what the issues are. This will go much faster if you involve your team, especially if you involve the people that are actually doing the work. And then you want to make sure you've got the right group of people on the care team or the triage team so that they're working together to understand, well, what are the engineering, what are the design, what are the art implications of this? And you want to focus on bringing issues to the forefront. You're less at this point concerned about regaining velocity or becoming faster, but more about, have we uncovered all of the things that could potentially cause issues? And you want to be thinking about this as taking time to stabilize things is kind of a feature in development versus a failure. So the team shouldn't feel bad if you have to come in and say, okay, we're stopping everything and now we're going to diagnose what the problems are. As another example, we had a team that kept adding new puzzle mechanics to their game. So, you get very excited. You're like, hey, I thought of this really cool idea and it's really simple. It's only going to take me a day or two to do this. And so people were just kind of putting stuff in the build, and they had roughly 10 partially implemented mechanics for the puzzle stuff, but really only 4 of them were kind of fully functional and close to being at a beta. So they had 10 that were in this unfinished state because they just kept adding. So we froze all the work. And we took a few days and we assessed all 14 of these or 12 or 14 of these things. And we said, okay, are we going to finish this or are we going to cut this? So we kind of made some guidelines for what does it mean if we want to finish this. Finish was, it had gotten good player feedback already in the prototype phase. We had a clear path forward for what it would take to finish it. And B, we had time to implement the stuff that we knew needed to be finished. And so we were able to kind of assess which ones we would just leave for later. You can always leave stuff later for downloadable content or for sequels. So if you are loath to sort of kill an idea outright, which I understand, just say, you know what, we're going to park that here and we'll look at it later after we get this game shipped, and then we can see if we want to add this in DLC. And so in this instance, by the time we had finished diagnosing the problem and kind of putting the plan together, we cut about 6 different things from there. So we cut almost 50% of what the team was working on. This helped the build become more stable. The gameplay mechanics were more cohesive. We were getting better player feedback. And so taking that couple days to do that was definitely worth the stoppage. Okay. Next, diagnose the injury. So I've kind of talked about this a little bit as well, but you want to talk to the team. And I love making lists. So if you have a whiteboard or if you have a Miro board, if you're a virtual team, just something that you can use to make a list together so that everybody can kind of see what's happening. You want to ask certain questions when you're talking with the team, like what's late? Why is it late? Who's blocked the most? What assumptions are we making that are either correct or incorrect? And so you want to have those kind of conversations. It might also be helpful to have private conversations with the team as well, because there could be things going on that they don't want to bring up in a group setting. Perhaps there's personality conflicts. Perhaps someone doesn't feel comfortable working with somebody else. Maybe there's communication issues or personality issues. So I think it's really important to take that private time. I have definitely worked with teams where there are personality issues. Somebody might have a more abrupt way of communicating and it seems really rude and unpleasant for some of the team members to interface with this person. And so in cases like that, I've established a rapport with the person that is having difficulty communicating. And then once I've done that, I can kind of coach them through how to interact differently with people to get a better result. Because normally what I have seen is that if somebody is viewed as the problem person on the team, they may not know this because they may not be aware that the way they're communicating or coming across is having this impact. I can guarantee, I don't want to say guarantee, but I can say that most of the time it's not people's intent to come across as jerks or to act like jerks. And so if you're able to kind of work with them in a more neutral way, establish rapport, and then help coach them, that can be a really good outcome because then they're getting the support they need, the team is getting the support they need, and communication is improving. You also want to see if the same things keep happening over and over again. Like, want to ask yourself, why does this keep happening? And the other important thing is that you really want to look at using data, not assumptions. If you're starting the sentence with, I feel like, but you don't have any data, like playtest feedback, or if you've got analytics in your game, you can consult those data and analytics. You can go talk to the QA department. You need to go talk to different people and get different inputs and data. You can't just go off of someone's gut feelings or assumptions. Getting the data and working through that as a team is going to be more effective than for one person to come up and say, here's what I think the problem is, and here's what the solution is, without getting other points of impact. You can look at what people are saying in the community. So if you have an active community, even though you haven't launched the game, but you've been giving them versions of the game to look at, you can look at that. If the game's already launched, you can look at what they're saying in the online store reviews and things like that. Once you've kind of diagnosed what the problem is, you do want to let the publisher know. I talked about that earlier. It's really important for the publisher to be aware if there's issues on the project, because if they don't know about the issues and then it presents itself later on down the line and you need more money or support from them, but they didn't know that you were already in trouble to begin with, it becomes much more difficult or challenging for them to provide the support you need. As an example, I had a team that they were having cash flow issues, and so some people on the team didn't get paid or opted not to get paid until, a month or two down the line, but they didn't let the publisher know this. And so then later, when we were looking at some of the additional funding and whatnot, and they were trying to get some additional funding for some back pay, the publisher's like, well, we're not aware of this, so we need some more information as to why this happened. Because if the publisher had been aware to begin with that they were in a situation where people were not going to get paid for that month, we could have maybe come up with a different solution. So those are the sorts of things that you want to be looking at. Okay. Next, apply treatment. So for the treatment, it's basically you want to build a realistic plan that is based around your facts and data and what the capabilities of the team are. The treatment's not about fixing everything. It's just that you want to focus on the top things that are blocking you so that you can get the project back moving again. Um, you want to create kind of a crisis plan. So for that, I mean, a crisis plan can take any shape or form. Basically, when I put together a crisis plan, it's got a couple different things on it. Like, okay, we know we need to hire in these additional people on the team. I know that I need to go get this type of outsourcing support. I know that I need this much additional QA testing. I know that, you know, these are the things that are going to bring more time and money to the project. So I put those in the crisis plan. If it's something that we're handling internally without additional funding, it might be like, okay, we've put a new process in place. Here is the new process, right? Here is who is now in charge. If you have to restructure the team, that would be part of what you write about in the crisis plan. Here's the problem. Here's what we're doing about it. And then you use this crisis plan as your blueprint for implementing the solutions. So you share it with the team and say, here's where we're going forward. And, you get the team on board to help them implement solutions. One of the questions that you may have is at what point do you bring the larger portion of the team in to the fact that there's a problem on the project? It really kind of depends on how much the team at large is going to be impacted. If you have a team and they're kind of working and they've got stuff they're doing and they don't necessarily need to be worried and they're not directly impacted by the problem you're solving, you probably don't need to involve them in the whole day-to-day stuff. Once you actually have the solution in place and you've kind of started implementing it, at that point you can say to the team, hey, just wanted to let you know we've been dealing with a little bit of a challenge on our side. We were having issues getting quality audio, and we had a batch of audio that was very bad, and the publisher saw it and they were very unhappy. But we've identified what the issue is. We figured out a plan. Here's what the plan is, because you do want to keep the team informed of problems even after you fix them. And then, but you don't want to unnecessarily burden them and cause more stress. Also, when you do the treatment or whatever your plan is, you want to set short-term goals so that you can check progress and making sure that things are going in the right direction. For example, one of the things, I had a group that was very ambitious about all of the different things they were going to accomplish by alpha. Well, number one, their version of alpha versus my definition of alpha as their publishing producer was very different. So first we had to align on what that definition looked like. And so once we kind of aligned around that and I had a full understanding of all the different things that we were doing, we were able to have a very fruitful conversation about what things were actually necessary for alpha based on the definition we were using. Usually alpha means that you have representative examples in the game of sort of key gameplay mechanics, and you can start to get a feel and understanding for what the game is. So this doesn't mean that you have to have your alpha crammed from start to finish with all the stuff you're doing. And so when we kind of redefined what their alpha was, instead of them trying to work on multiple playable areas, multiple enemies, and multiple things, we were able to narrow it down to like, okay, we're going to have this zone playable. It's going to have these two enemy types. Placeholder UI is fine, but we want it to be functional, meaning that the buttons do what they're supposed to do, but stylistically, it's not going to look super pretty, and it's not going to have all the fun animations and VFX. And we determined that this gameplay system was a secondary system, so we could do that at a later time. We could, pick another date when we're like, okay, we're going to have these systems at alpha. And so there's different ways that you can apply treatment once you've diagnosed what the problem is. Okay, next, communication. So, as I mentioned before, once you have diagnosed the issue and you need to communicate it out, you want to make sure that you do this so that people are held accountable. You can communicate this out if you have daily updates like stand-ups. It could be good to communicate in that. If you do weekly milestone reviews, you could communicate it there. If you have publisher check-ins or anything like that, what you want to do is figure out what forms of communication work within the cadence that you have. If you're using Slack or Discord or other types of written communication, or you use Google Docs, I would also encourage you to post that information there or on your Confluence page. And so that people who didn't necessarily digest the information when you mentioned it in a meeting, you can point them to your Confluence page or to a Slack, with the bulletin board feature they have in Slack, to get the information that they need. You also need to make sure that you're tracking progress against your plan. So if you said, here's what the plan is, your producer is probably going to be tracking and making sure that the things on the plan are getting fulfilled and that stuff is getting implemented, or that if one of your solutions on the plan is not going to work, that they can then talk to the appropriate people and find out an alternative solution. And then you want to just give regular updates. You really, once you have gone through the process of diagnosing and treating a problem and you've opened up the communication, you want to keep the communication open and transparent as much as possible. So I encourage you to send regular updates to people. Keep modeling the behavior you want to see, which is we want people to come to us if they think there's a problem. If they see a red flag, they should let their producer know, things like that. And that's going to also help you spot early warning signs more clearly. Okay. All right, recovery and communication, or recovery and prevention. So number one, I think it's very important to celebrate wins. When you've worked together as a team and you're working really hard, it is nice to recognize the little wins. And it could be just little things every week, like, hey, we got this thing submitted to Microsoft a day early. Great. Or, hey, we just got this thing submitted on time. Also worth a celebration. If your team, if one of your dev teams turns in a really great milestone build, you may want to share it with your internal publishing team. I'm speaking as a publishing producer and celebrating, hey, this team has come a long way. This is what we're doing. If someone's tried something new. So just find little ways that you can be positive and reinforce wins with your team, because when you're struggling with challenges and problems, it is easy to let those overshadow everything. And then you want to hold regular retros. So I'll talk in a few minutes about what a retro is and how you do that. But that's basically just a brief look back on the things that you've done and figuring out what are the things we can learn from this that we can apply to the future. You can look at doing a risk assessment. So in a few minutes, I'll talk about how you do risk assessments. I think it's good if you do some sort of weekly assessment, so you can keep a spreadsheet of all the various risks, you can prioritize them, and then you can just make sure the risks getting resolved. Are the risks low risk, but we'll have it here just in case, so things like that. And then you want to look for early warning signs. So one of the teams that I worked with, we did sort of a 15-minute risk assessment each week. And basically, we would just ask ourselves, what's likely to slip next week? Is there anything unclear this week that we need to know of that can help prevent what might slip? And then what are the blockers? And so by kind of setting at the beginning of the week and saying, here's where we think the risks are. So we're going to make sure that people are emphasizing work that helps those risks, that helps cut down on challenges like for the following week. It can also, thinking in this mindset can help you have less chaos as you get later into the project. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about, I've got 5 useful tools, what I consider useful tools here. And we'll kind of talk through each one of those. And the risk matrix helps you identify sort of the high impact risks. The Eisenhower matrix will help you prioritize where you want to spend effort. Roadmaps and milestones help you maintain visibility on the project and the process. A RACI chart, which I'll talk about in detail, helps clarify roles and responsibilities. And retros can help find early warning signs. They help you learn from the past and all of that. Most of these tools, again, you can scale them for however you need them. You can do a super lightweight version of them, or you can do the more formal PMP, project managery version of them. It just depends on your team size, your team culture, what people are going to be engaged with. To be honest, most of the teams I work with, I start by doing a light implementation of these things to get people used to the concepts and ideas, because they're a lot more receptive when you toss it out as, hey, let's experiment with doing this thing and see if we like it. You're more likely to get buy-in from the team versus coming in and saying, by the way, this is how we're doing all of this stuff from now on, and we're going to do it this way. And that is not as inviting and engaging to the team at large. All right. First one, risk matrix. So most of these things that I'm talking about over the next couple slides, I'm just giving a very high level, like, hey, here's a tool. If you want to learn more about each of these things, you certainly can do so. There's plenty of great information out there about risk prioritization and mitigation and all of those things. This is a very sort of high level overview about how you want to think about risks. So on one axis, you can see the probability of a risk occurring. So is this likely to happen on my project? It goes from low to high. And then what impact will it have on the project, right? So if you're looking at these quadrants, you can see that if something that is a high probability and high impact is something that you will want to address immediately. So if you're like, this is definitely going to happen on the project, and if it does, that's going to be a problem, you want to think through, how are you going to do this? So for example, if you're working on console games, you probably have a high probability that you will not pass the first submission when you submit to Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. And if you don't pass, that does have a huge impact on your project. It means that you can't ship your game. So that's a risk you want to mitigate as best you can right away. And the best way to mitigate that is to allow ample time in your development process to make sure that if you're planning to launch, say, let's say the end of June, don't plan on submitting your console builds the first week in June, because it's not likely that they will get approved and ready to go in time. So you want to count back and say, okay, we need it to have at least 2 months, for example, to go through the approval process. And so that's kind of how you want to think about it. So if you have something that is going to be a high impact but a low probability of occurring, the ones that kind of fall in section 3, you want to monitor it, right? And you want to be aware that it could happen. And the same for projects for risks that would be high impact but low probability of occurring. So the things in quadrant 2 or 3 are things that you should be aware of, and you should note, yep, this is likely to be a risk. It is going to be a category 2 risk or a category 3 risk because of these factors, but we're aware of it and we've kind of got some stuff in place. And then if something falls into quadrant 4, it is probably not something you necessarily need to be worried about constantly. If it's something small and you can fix it, go ahead and fix it. But just having level 4s on the project are not a big deal. But you definitely want to have mitigation strategies in place for things in quadrants 1, and being aware of things in quadrants 2 and 3. Okay. Next, this is the Eisenhower matrix. So this is a very handy tool, especially if you have multiple things to do and you're kind of feeling overwhelmed with all the different work. It helps you figure out what's the stuff that I need to do. So the most important things and the most urgent things, okay, that's in quadrant 1. You need to do those, so you know that that's the highest priority. You can delegate something if it is still urgent to get done, but it's not as important. So if it's something that you can delegate to somebody and maybe guide them on how to do that, you can do that, right? So that automatically helps get stuff off your plate. If it is not urgent, but still important, you can decide when you want to do it, so you can schedule it for a later date for the next sprint or 2 sprints or things like that. And then if it's not important, it's not urgent, just don't even worry about it. I think people have a tendency to get these huge task lists or this list of work that needs to get done. And at the end of the day, there's really only sort of like the top 2 or 3 things that they need to do. And there's probably quite a few things on there that honestly they know they're not going to do, but they want to list it. But it's not important and it's not urgent, so that work's not likely to happen. So it's okay to say, you know what, I'm just going to remove this from my list. If you want to keep a backup list and say, here's a bunch of stuff and ideas that at some point I want to get to, it's fine to have that archive. But if you're really trying to kind of bring clarity to your role and to your work and to your teams, using this prioritization network can be super helpful. All right, roadmaps and milestones. Hopefully, everyone is kind of familiar with what a roadmap is. A roadmap just will kind of outline, okay, here's how we get from concept to launch, and then it kind of helps you time box out major areas of the project. So a roadmap is a very big picture thing. So you would have, like alpha is going to be for 6 months, beta is going to be for 4 months, then we're going to be in the submission period for 2 months. So like that's one thing you would roadmap out. You might say, okay, design is going to write the narratives for these 3 chapters. Then the design implementers are going to implement that work. Then we're going to get it QA tested. So you can roadmap out sort of big chunks of work along a calendar line. And that gives you a very nice big picture of what's happening. And then it can also help you identify where there's gaps or where you might be going over schedule. And then you also want to think about breaking your work down into milestones. So if you have your roadmap as your big picture, the milestones are going to be checkpoints for your game. Some key milestones that get tracked are the concept, the prototype, a first playable, an alpha, beta release candidate. And so if you're working with a publisher, you probably already have milestones defined for each of these things. And so I would encourage you to use your milestones as a basis for how you plan out your work on the project. And that can also help you better pinpoint where you're likely to run into issues and roadblocks. Road mapping your workout can also help you figure out, am I running over schedule or do I actually have some additional time I was not aware of? Okay, another tool you can use is a RACI chart. I find this really useful if there are people on the project that are unclear of what their roles and responsibilities are, or unclear what other people in the project are supposed to do. Again, when you work with small indie teams, people are going to be wearing multiple hats. I worked with a team where it was unclear who had sort of like final design say on feature implementation, because there were multiple designers on the project, and then there was also the creative director, and then there was just confusion, like, can the creative director overrule the lead designer? Or is the lead designer, the person that has final say? And so you could make what's called a RACI chart. Again, this is a common project management tool. RACI just stands for responsible. Responsible is the person who actually is going to do the work and take the action to get something done. You can have more than one person responsible for a thing, but it is much cleaner if you can structure it in a way so that one person is responsible for one thing. Accountable, that's the person who kind of owns the outcome and deliverable of the work. They may not actually do the work, but they're responsible for making sure the work is completed and correct. So in this case, you could say that the creative director is accountable for the game and sort of how it plays, but the lead designer is responsible for, designing the gameplay features and using his team of designers to implement the work. If you're consulted, it just means that you're usually a subject matter expert and you're consulted. So somebody might ask you for your input or expert opinion, or for you to provide feedback. And then if you're supposed to be informed, that just means you need to be kept up to date on what's happening. So usually, like your publisher, somebody that falls under the informed thing. If you have an exec producer, that person probably would be underinformed. If you were trying to solve some sort of tools issue or an art pipeline issue, you might need to consult with your tech director on some of your solutions. But doing charts like this, and this is a very simple one. I've done ones where we have had 50 things on here, right? And then across the top, we've had like 12 people, because the team was just in such chaos about who was supposed to do what, that we needed that type of chart in order to make things more clear. And then the last tool I want to talk about today is retros. So if you might have heard the term post-mortem, which is also a very popular term, I prefer the term retro. I think that it more accurately describes that you're kind of doing a retrospective on what you did before so that you can figure out what you learned and what you can um, use moving forward. You know, retros don't have to be a big deal, right? If you are doing them with small groups and you're doing frequently enough, you can keep it as a very simple format of if you do these virtually, you just set up a Miro board. I set up sort of 3 areas, the start, stop, continue are each their own areas. You get a bunch of virtual Post-it notes. At the beginning, you say, "Okay, we're gonna take 5 minutes. Everyone's gonna write on their Post-it notes what we should start doing based on what we learned over this last sprint." People populate the notes. You can have a conversation about it. You pull out a couple things that you can start doing, and then you do that for each of the categories, the stop and continue. That is, and if you keep them short and frequent, they don't feel like such a burden for the team, and people are not saving things up for the retro. I used to work at a place where everyone's like, "Oh, I'm going to bring that up in the retro," knowing that we basically did a huge post-mortem at the end of, 5 or 6 months of work. So instead of bringing problems or issues to the forefront now, we're saying, "Hey, we should do this differently." People would wait until we officially did it in the retro, and at that point, you know, you probably could have improved a lot of different things if you had had them more frequently. And then also, you just want to focus on changing 1 or 2 things. Again, you're striving for consistency and progress, not perfection. Okay. All right, so that's the end of my presentation. We're going to be opened up for Q&A and wanted you to be thinking through like what what needs first aid on your game? Where could you diagnose issues and get clarity on solutions? And let's talk about, if you want to share some real world examples and look at some triage steps.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was awesome. We actually do have uh, some questions. So we're going to go ahead and pull up this one. So, Adam from YouTube, how can you mitigate the impact that stopping non-critical work might have on other members slash teams that aren't in trouble but still rely on the paused work?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think that is part of your diagnosis phase is working on the work that they can do. But if they're waiting for some of the work, eventually, you're going to. What I like to do is kind of figure out how many days can they continue working on their stuff before they're going to be impacted by this problem we're trying to solve. And so, if it's a day or 2 days, then I try to find out are there other things that they could move on to that are also non-critical in different areas for the next couple days, or do we need to pause them for now? And if we do need to pause them completely, then I advise them go work on some skill building things, right? So if there's something they've been wanting to get training on this or that, that's a good opportunity for them to do some training sort of stuff.
Awesome. All right. Next up, we have Margarita on YouTube. How can you find out things when the team doesn't want to share the information?
Oh, yes. This is where it becomes very important as the producer to make sure you've established rapport with the individuals on your team. I hate to say it, but people do enjoy talking, and perhaps gossiping might be a better word for it. If you have established rapport with people on your team, hopefully they will be coming to you or chatting with you, and you can pick up on things through their conversations or what they're upset by. So if I am talking to somebody and they say, "Oh, blah, 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 blah," and then I'm like, "Huh, that sounds like it could be a problem," I would, start asking some probing questions to that person. And then what I found is that eventually they will come to the oh yeah, I can see that that's going to be a problem. We probably should do something about it. And so you can start there. If your team is really not communicating with you, you have to kind of go individual by individual and then open up build that rapport, build that trust so that they start coming you. Once they do that, then in group settings to model the transparency and trust that you want to build with the team by saying, hey, we're going to have some problems. We want to work together to fix them, and really keep emphasizing that people are not going to get in trouble. People are not going to get fired or whatever, but we need to work together to solve problems. And you really need to work hard to build that culture.
All right. So another one from Margarita. How can you face egos or stubbornness? For example, a leader might be damaging the project because they're too fixed on their ideas, but the team agrees is a bad idea.
Yeah, unfortunately, that happens more commonly than you think. Cases like that, that's where I try to figure out how can I get data from people outside of the team that can help make the case either this is a good idea or a bad idea. So a lot of times, depending on the state of the game, I will suggest, can we get some user feedback? So either the quick and dirty way to do it is to maybe do like a friends and family thing. Usually teams get excited by that, but the problem with using friends and family is that they're going to say really nice and great things about the team. Um, Other instances where I've said, hey, let's send the game out for a mock review, just what we have now to kind of get a feel. Let's send this over to a UX testing house. Let's have the publishing team take a look at it. So it's really anything that's not on the actual team. I try to see, can I get some independent feedback from other people? Because then what I hope to do is that I can present this information to the team at large, including the person that's very stubborn, and then kind of see from there what the reaction is. And if that person is still stubborn, then I will probably have a separate conversation with them, especially since he's the leader of the team, and say, hey, I'm concerned because I got this feedback. I'm also hearing the same information from the team. I just want to understand what you think about this feedback. And if you don't think it's a problem, why? Because then you can kind of maybe help figure out where's this person coming from, motivating them to be so stubborn. And, I have had to do that. And in some cases, the person felt like they were the only one on the project that cared about the game. And so he felt that he had to go back in and make sure that everybody's work was perfect and that everything was good. And whenever anybody came with a solution, to slap it down because it's not a solution he came up with. But when he started getting some support from me and sort of understanding from the team what they were worried about, and then the team started being more supportive, it was easier for him to open up and kind of work with the team on what was going on. But it took many months to kind of make this change.
All right. Thank you so very much, Heather. You did amazing. Very informative. Next up, guys, we have Junie, Layla, Laura, Kamer, and Kitty with their group discussion on milestones, mishaps, and moving parts, production, and practice. So hang tight. We'll be back with that. Heather, thank you so much again. We really appreciate you having you on the show today. So we'll see you guys soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.